Hi, hello everyone, and welcome to the State of 911 webinar series hosted by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's National 911 Program. My name is Joni Harvey. I'm the Deputy Coordinator at the NHTSA National 911 Program. Today's session is the Safe Streets and Roads for All grants, preparing a strong fiscal year 26 post-crash care application. And we're going to examine how 911 centers have successfully applied for Safe Streets for All, or as you have heard us call this, SS4A grants. We will begin with an overview of the SS4A grant program from the U.S. Department of Transportation, and then you're going to hear from some fiscal year 25 recipients, Barnes County 911 Dispatch Center and Shawnee County Sheriff's Office. They will share some of their lessons learned and some practical guidance on navigating the SS4A application process, as well as some strategies that worked really well for them for collaborating with partners to strengthen those applications and make sure that you have that support needed for the post-crash care and the emergency response improvements. The State of 911 webinar series is designed to provide useful information for our 911 stakeholder community about federal, state, and local participation in the planning, design, and the advancement of 911. It includes some real experiences from leaders in our industry and who are utilizing these processes throughout the country. Today's webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on 911.gov. And to access any previous recordings or to learn more about the NHTSA National 911 Program's State of 911 webinar series, please visit 911.gov. And please note that all participants' access have been put in listen-only mode at this time, but closed captioning is available. So to enable this feature, if you need it, please click on the Show Captions button at any time. And again, a recording of today's webinar and accompanying materials will be provided through our Gov Delivery email announcements. If you're not signed up for those, please do so. And that again is at 911.gov. And it is now my great pleasure to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. We are honored to be joined by Carolyn Mulville. She is the Program Evaluation Lead for the Safe Streets and Roads for All and Reconnecting Communities program in the Office of Infrastructure Deployment with the U.S. Department of Transportation. With that, I will turn it over to Carolyn. Thank you.
Thanks, Joni, and hi, everyone. I am going to be providing a short overview of the SS4A program before we get into some specific examples of funded projects. So the program was established in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which passed in 2021. The program supports regional, local, and tribal initiatives to prevent roadway deaths and serious injuries. It also supports the Department of Transportation's National Roadway Safety Strategy, which has a goal of 0 deaths and serious injuries on our nation's roadways. So the program was authorized by Congress to provide $5 billion in grants over 5 years. This year, which is fiscal year 2026, will be the 5th and final year of the program with its existing funding. We're hoping that we will get additional funding in the future, but as of now, this is the final year of funding for the program. The Notice of Funding Opportunity for this year has not been published yet, but we're expecting it very soon. In fact, it might be hot off the presses. It may be released tomorrow. So keep checking our website as we will be posting the NOFO and all relevant information related to that on the website. So the foundation of the SS4A program is the development of a comprehensive safety action plan, which uses data, involves a variety of safety stakeholders, and includes public engagement to identify the biggest safety problems in a community. That effort can then create a list of priority safety projects and strategies to address the safety problems that have been identified. The program allows for multiple types of interventions to increase safety in roadway systems, and these can include infrastructure projects or behavioral or operational activities. If you're not familiar with the safe systems approach, which is noted on this slide, you can check out our website for more information about that. So the program has two types of grants: planning and demonstration grants and implementation grants. We won't go into all the information about these today, but we wanted to give you an outline of what they are. Again, you can find a lot of resources on the website to better understand the funding options, as well as more information in the NOFO once that's released, and in the how to apply webinars that we'll be having in the coming weeks. So planning and demonstration grants fund three different sets of activities. The first is developing the comprehensive safety action plan that we're talking about. And two other activities are conducting supplemental planning in support of an action plan and carrying out demonstration activities in support of an action plan. Many EMS and public safety agencies apply to develop a post-crash care plan or to pilot whole blood or emergency communications programs. These are eligible activities under the program as long as there is an overarching safety action plan for your jurisdiction. And we'll be talking a lot about that in the coming slides. Or if the activities are applied for in conjunction with developing a new safety action plan. You can also apply to update a local safety action plan to include post-crash activities, as many action plans don't initially include those activities. Now, for implementation grants, that funding funds implementation of projects and strategies that are identified in the action plan. And that also can fund any required planning and design for those projects. Those grants can also include supplemental planning and demonstration activities. Those activities can be included in either type of grant. This funding can include a broader implementation of a whole blood or emergency communications programs, going beyond what would be included in pilot programs, which would be funded through demonstration activities. So for this webinar, we wanted to highlight the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. Some of your agencies may not have a history of coordinating with the transportation agencies in your area that would have this type of plan, so we wanted to provide some clarity about what exactly it is. So Comprehensive Safety Action Plans are developed to address roadway safety challenges in a community. The plans must be multimodal and multidisciplinary in nature. So we're talking about the different types of strategies that can be included in an action plan. They also use data-driven approaches to identify safety issues and support the implementation of the projects and strategies to support the goal of reaching zero fatalities and serious injuries. As I mentioned before, an action plan must be in place prior to applying for an implementation grant or a planning and demonstration grant that doesn't involve developing an action plan. So for an action plan to be eligible, it needs to be primarily focused on addressing roadway safety for multiple modes, and it must meet the requirements of the self-certification eligibility checklist that's mentioned here and that's available on our website. Some examples of plans that might meet the criteria are listed here: Vision Zero action plans, local road safety plans, and tribal transportation safety plans. So if you come across those plans, those might be the plans we're talking about. Other jurisdictions that are larger than an individual city, like a metropolitan planning organization or a county, may have a plan that meets the eligibility requirements. And in that case, an applicant can use that plan in their application as long as it covers their entire geographic area. Implementation grant applications, again, require a complete eligible action plan that will include the project or strategy that you're proposing for funding. So those emergency communications activities or whole blood programs, etc. If the plan that you have and that you're hoping to use is strictly focused on post-crash care or emergency response, you'll likely need to include another plan in your application that addresses other roadway safety issues. And like I mentioned, that could be a local roadway safety plan or a safety plan from a larger entity, such as a county or an MPO. Our website has a lot of resources about action plans, and so definitely check that out when you're going through this process. So over the past years of the program, we've identified some common issues with action plans that are submitted to us, and we've listed some of those issues here. As we mentioned, action plans need to be comprehensive of the transportation system in your jurisdiction, both in terms of covering different transportation modes, and covering the whole geography of the community. It also needs to be developed with public involvement, and needs to reference the activities that you're proposing. These plans can take years to develop, so if you don't currently have one, you should consider reaching out to another agency that covers your jurisdiction or apply for funding to develop a plan as part of your application. It's not the kind of thing that you can quickly create while you're putting together your application, and the analysis, projects, and strategies for an action plan need to go beyond what we require for the application. So definitely reach out to those other agencies in your jurisdiction and find out what they have and if you want to work together to create or update an action plan. So if you're wondering whether your existing plan is eligible, as I mentioned before, you can use a self-certification eligibility worksheet and other resources that are available on our webpage. We also offer a pre-application action plan review to folks once the NOFO is published, and we will have the deadline for that both in the NOFO and available on our website. So basically, you can send in the plan or plans that you're hoping to use for your application. We will review those plans, and let you know if they are eligible. Now, this process is only available for review of that worksheet and action plans for eligibility. We're not able to pre-review any other materials for your application, but a lot of communities have used that in the past so that they can make sure they're on the right path with their application. If you don't have an eligible action plan and you're not sure if one exists, these steps here on this slide are a good place to start. Again, transportation partners in your area may have a better idea of whether such a plan exists, since this is traditionally a plan that's developed by a transportation planning agency. You can use the grant awards map that we note here that you can get to on our website to see where previous communities have received funding. So to get an idea of who might have created a plan. And again, if the eligible plan doesn't exist, you can apply for SS4A funds to develop one. Now, as I've been going through, I've been mentioning our website a lot. We understand that for some of you, an SS4A application might be your first federal funding request, and you might not be familiar with the process for applying for federal funds. So to support our applicants, we've created a series of resources to help you develop a successful application. These include checklists, frequently asked questions documents, and step-by-step instructions on how to fill out the required forms and to get the required data points. You can find all these on our website, and we will be updating the website based on questions that we receive through our inbox and during our webinars. So keep checking the website while you're going through the application process so you can see all the new and improved information that's available there. Another website that has resources that could be helpful is the SS4A Clearinghouse website, which can also be linked from the main SS4A website. This site includes examples of action plans that have been developed using SS4A funds, so you can get a better idea of what's required as a part of the process. As I mentioned before, we'll also be having how to apply webinars that will be coming up in the next few weeks after the NOFO is released. So again, we highly recommend that you check out all these resources to see if you can get any questions answered. In case you still have remaining questions after reviewing all those materials, you can reach out to our inbox and we can answer questions. Nothing too specific about your application, but anything about the process and the required pieces of your application, you can reach out to us with any questions. So with that, I will pass back to Joni.
Carolyn, thank you so much. I know that was a lot to unpack in a little amount of time. That was wonderful. And for our attendees, just know that the Department of Transportation and NHTSA have been incredibly supportive in welcoming 911 to apply for SS4A and helping us to figure out and navigate the process. There will be more training webinars and things like that coming out for learning how to do this. It's still a short period of time once that NOFO comes out, so we want you all to be prepared, but thank you so much. And I don't want this to scare anyone away from applying. Like, fear not. There are so many resources like Carolyn talked about, and there will be more to come on that as far as guidance and applying for those. So now we're going to move on to hearing from a couple of our fiscal year 25 awardees. And really what we're trying to do is get you excited about thinking about 911's role in highway safety and how that connection exists all the time, every day, and how they have successfully used SS4A to help forward some of their projects. So we're going to turn this over to Sarah Miller. She's the director of the Barnes County 911 Dispatch Center in North Dakota. And Barnes County is an SS4A fiscal year 25 awardee for a next generation 911 rural ready smart interagency crash coordination 911 CAD to CAD project. Sarah, I will turn this over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here speaking to you all today. And first of all, I would just like to acknowledge that this can be very intimidating, but fear not, as those who've spoken before me have stated, this is very doable. There are tons of resources out there and available for you. And quite honestly, if I can do it, you can do it too. So do not be afraid to give it a shot and to apply. And I think there's a great presentation here for you today to learn and to take and run with, so you too can apply for the next SS4A round. So with that, I'm really excited to speak with you today on our grant application and award. We're very excited for this project. And I'll tell you a little bit about our road safety action plan development and our demonstration project that we came up with. So my name is Sarah Miller. I'm the director and 911 coordinator for the Barnes County 911 Dispatch Center. So I run the dispatch center. I have 13 public safety telecommunicators. I also do the GIS and addressing for our county, among many other things. I'm the only employee in our office that is not tied to a council position. I still fill in on the council here and there, but we are a very small department. So again, with that, it's doesn't you don't have to have a grant administrator or this huge department to make this accessible to you. If you are willing to do the work and put in the research and collaborate with those available to you, it is totally doable, and it's accessible to you. So Barnes County is a population of about 10,000, a little over 10,000 people. We have a large section of the I-94 corridor running through our county as well, which keeps us very busy. Our call volume does not typically reflect our population size. We're the 15th largest county out of 53 counties in North Dakota. We have just under 1,500 township road miles, about 330 miles of county gravel and blacktop that our highway department manages. And we're unique in the state of North Dakota in that we share a border with 6 other counties, and then we border with 5 other public safety answering points that have response areas that come into our county as well. So that when I start talking about our project, that's why I wanted to cover that. But I also want to speak a little bit about too. This was my first ever federal grant application that I took on. I had no clue what I was saying yes to because this was not my original idea, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. But it's an idea that I had believed in, and we had been talking about at a state level. We just weren't sure how to access funds to try and implement it and be a proof of concept. So I felt very much like a fish out of water because it was a large learning process, but I do love to be a student. And I think we grow the most when we're uncomfortable, and this was a really great learning curve. And as I said before, there was tons of resources available, and many people that were accessible to me to help me out. And it was not a one-person project. I might be the one here speaking, but it was not just me that made this successful at all for us. So do not let the size of your agency or that it's, this big application scare you, because it is doable. And I think collaboration and support are truly what make it successful. Let's see here. So our next gen 911 rural ready, first of all, we did not have a road safety action plan or comprehensive safety action plan that qualified. So we needed to go back and create a new one, or we needed to apply for funding to create a new one. Our last one was in 2015, and it really just focused on a couple sections of road. They had completed all of the projects, and that was all that we had. So that was the first section of it. And then the second part is the CAD to CAD solution. So this big idea came from actually our North Dakota 911 Association Strategic Technology and Planning Committee that we have. Because North Dakota is very rural, we struggle with sharing information across jurisdictions. And we have a lot of shared response areas. You know, like I said, with Barnes County, I have 5 other public safety answering points that surround me that have response area coming into my county. So when somebody calls 911 and they're in one of those jurisdictions, I have to put that caller on hold to call my neighboring public safety answering point to page out another service into that to that crash, we'll say. Um, and so it breaks that trust with that caller, and could prolong medical instructions, life-saving medical instructions. We could lose that caller could hang up. Various other things. And it's just not a smooth process. It also delays that response. We also have a response time of 30 to 40 minutes at some points as well, just due to the rural nature of our state. North Dakota is very unique. That's our strongest asset, but it has also created the challenges and standardization with that as well. So, a big part of this CAD to CAD and that discussion at that state level was cost, right? So we're very rural. We have a small tax base in most of these counties, except for where we have the big cities like Bismarck, Fargo, Minot. And we also our state just passed a 3% tax cap legislatively. So the kind of overarching goal of this is to be a proof of concept for deployment on a statewide scale. And really the challenge with that and fitting that into a grant is you have to take that idea that you have and fit that into what the grant is looking for. And that is really comes down to the safety action plan and then your demonstration project and making sure that those two things really talk. By incorporating that safety action plan, we're also able to find ways to improve our roads and make them safer for our responders and those traveling in and out of the county. If the roads are safer, maybe we won't need to respond as often, we can hope. And then we also included a lot of data. So I had a lot of help from outside people to help support this project as well. But some of the data we really included was our local statistics versus the statewide statistics that were available. So for example, in my county, lane departure crashes account for 54% locally in Barnes County, but 42% statewide. So we were able to really show that Barnes County struggled with those particular issues more so than like the overall statewide. And I think that was a really important part of that as well. So getting into our application, it really was collaboration, connections. I reached out to anybody I could think of. It was not a one-person project. Like I said, it was a big learning curve for me personally. Our next generation 911 coordinator for the state of North Dakota was a huge, huge, huge help in this. This was kind of his initial idea. And then he asked me to kind of run with it a little bit and was there to help guide me and inform this idea a little bit as well. And then he also helped to make some of those connections for me as well. North Dakota State University is also one of our larger universities in the state here. They have a transportation institute It's called the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute. It's a research, education, and outreach center at the university. It's kind of like an advisory council made up of a bunch of organizations and industries and agencies, but they do tons of research. They publish. I had the privilege of working with them on a study they were doing on our section of I-94, actually, for the Highway Patrol the year before. And so it was kind of funny that I was able to work with them again, but they were able to get me all the crash data that I needed. They were able to donate their grant writer that they had to help kind of break down my narrative. Because again, I had never written anything like this before, so some guidance was just really handy. And on my slide here, I included a little excerpt of one of our original drafts. We actually took things out of the NOFO and the requirements and stuck them on a Word document and just started pasting things in there. So that way I could come back and start, just kind of brain dumping in there and then bring that back to my team that I had, and we could go through and say, yep, we like this part, maybe this isn't right. We're going to go through this. And we just sent that back and forth until we felt like we had it right. And that was, for us, worked really, really great. Um, Again, connections though, and collaboration. That was truly what I think made us successful in this. Because again, I just was so unfamiliar with kind of the process, and then also with the action plan. I reached out to our highway department, our county highway department superintendent, and sat down with her. I think we sat down for about 4.5 hours going over just transportation world things because that's not my purview. My concentration is the response and the people and getting responders there. I don't deal with what the roads look like and, that kind of things. And so her terminology was different than mine, and understanding what that actual action plan was and what a comprehensive one looked like versus what the one they had before was, what actually goes into it. What activities do we need to look at to inform the action plan, but also inform my demonstration plan, because those two things really need to connect and talk to each other and inform each other. And we only have 2 pages on the narrative to explain that, which is also very difficult. The other thing I needed from her was buy-in. Was she willing to partner on this? Because we all are a small county and we wear many hats. And so we needed to make sure that this was something that we were willing to take on together and work on together as well. My sheriff was also very key. He was able to give a really great alternative view into things as well, crash response and whatnot. And then he'll be able to help with some of the activities for the action plan. And he helped come up with one of ours, like the speed trailer, for example. So I believe we have some funds in ours for updating the speed trailer and posting that to create some safety awareness. Our commission was another part of that. So there's some fiscal responsibility. We have a 20% match in this. A lot of that is in kind. I was grateful enough that the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute, North Dakota DOT, and then myself, most of my time will count as in kind. And we were able to get creative with some of that, but there is still a fiscal impact from the county that I work for. And so making sure that they had buy-in and that they were supportive and on board with this and ready to champion it as well was really important. And then I also contacted our statewide Vision Zero team. I thought it was really important to connect our vision for this project, but also the action plan into kind of the overall Vision Zero goals as well. And you'll see on one of my next slides, I have some of that pulled up as well. And then we're tying our CAD into our neighboring county, which actually has the same CAD system as we do, which is just that much more of a benefit. And so they needed to make sure they were supporting us as well. Let's see here. The NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, I read through that thing. I can't tell you how many times. And as you can see on the slide here, taking chunks out of that and just putting it into a Word document, we need this, we need this. I highlighted, um, just researching. Um, let's see here. Asking questions, thinking outside the box. I dedicated an entire notebook to notes and research so I could go back and reference. Um, and just that really big picture, making sure that what I have in my narrative, what I have in my action plan, goals and activities, what I have in my CAD to CAD demonstration project, does that match what the grant is looking for? And with the action plan, is that my world in the 911 specific 911 center world? Probably not, but it's going to benefit my county. And so I think it was the phrase is the rising tide lifts all boats. And so if we can kind of kill two birds with one stone with this, why not? And I think that's really excellent. But connecting your vision, I think, is really, really important. Your project has to inform your action plan and vice versa. So what made us successful? I think it was a clear defined goal, that collaboration and that connected action plan and demonstration project. Like I said, we went back and forth and back and forth. I had people reread the narrative. I had anybody that I could think of, my highway superintendent, my husband, my local fire chief read through it. Anybody I could think of to get their hands on to read through that to see if it made sense to them. That is what I did. The CAD to CAD was the big overarching idea, but we really had to tie it together and make sure that it matched what the grant was looking for. The funds are available, but we have to know how to access them. So as the action plan, it wasn't specific to the center, but it will help us in the long run. And again, the NOFO, that notice of funding is so important. It's a really, really big document and it's a lot to consume. I physically printed it and highlighted it, went through highlighting it. I have the North Dakota Vision Zero plan up here from North Dakota DOT. That post-crash care is specifically really what we kind of referenced with our SMART goals and the 4 E's. We referenced that in our narrative as well. And that's part of the Vision Zero. But also I asked for help from my emergency manager. NDSU has what's called extension offices. I don't know if this is a thing for other states or other universities. The extension office's role is really to fill gaps in education in communities. So ag or family skills, life skills, cooking, nutrition, things like that. But your local economic development office is also another great resource. If you've never written grants before, they have tons of resources. They hosted a beginner grant writing class that I happened to take as well. That was extremely helpful. I have found with grants, you have to be creative and looking for them and for resources, but they are there. I think NHTSA and SS4A, they have a lot of resources out there. They want you to be successful. And so I think it's really amazing that this is all out there and available. And then again with the NOFO, just really referencing that scoring matrix to make sure that we were strategically meeting what the requirements were, and that it was available. So that's really kind of what I think helped us out and helped made us successful. I think the most important thing that we learned is that safety action plan needs to affect your demonstration project and vice versa, and collaboration is probably the most important part.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We appreciate you talking about your experiences, and we'd like to take a turn now from North Dakota to Kansas. My name, first off, is Max Severide. I am an emergency medical services specialist with the NHTSA Office of EMS. We do have EMS folks also interested in this award as well too. So just yesterday, we hosted a webinar to EMS partners, but very similar information and very similar principles apply for this type of SS4A grant application process. So you might even take a look at that EMS webinar when it gets posted, because much of the same is true. Our next SS4A Federal Fiscal Year 25 awardee, Shawnee County Sheriff's Office in Kansas, joins us today to discuss their projects to modernize 911 dispatch systems, expand the real-time crime center, and deploy a drone as first responder pilot. Finally, developing a countywide high injury network. Please allow me to introduce April Hazen, Director Jeremy Rabb, and Lieutenant Eric Coffin. Shawnee?
Hi, Max. Thank you. And thank everybody for being here today and inviting us to come along and talk. We are very excited about our SS4A award and just are excited to tell everybody about it and encourage everybody to apply. In Shawnee County, we really looked at we really looked at four different main areas. So we knew that we wanted to be able to enhance our 911 systems. We wanted to do our drones as first responder program because that's something that we had been talking about here for quite a while, wanting to be able to do. Third, we wanted to be able to update our technology to make sure that the traffic, our coordination was all up to date. And then we also wanted to do a supplemental to the CSAP plan that had already been done. So we knew at the end of the day that roadway safety and emergency response are all very closely related. And we also were able to acknowledge that the 911 system is really in the middle of that, is the center of that. So I'll talk a little bit about SS4 or about the CSAP. I know we've talked about it a bit before. I want to be able to get some other parts talked about, but our CSAP, we're looking forward to getting it done. We know that we're going to be able to use it not just for our SS4A program, but any other programs and grants that may come up in the future. It's going to be a document that we will be able to use for the next several years. One thing I will tell everybody is that we are going to RFP our CSAP out, and we are already working on the RFP. We want to make sure that we get the best qualified people in here to be able to look at our community. And, you're able to, from our perspective, we can say, hey, we know that that road right there, that highway is really bad and we have accidents there. But for us to be able to have an outside company come in and be able to look at the data and have the time to put all of our data together and then bring back a good document that we can use and be able to show why things need to change, why we need to be able to do things different, for us is extremely important because we don't have one in place right now. I do want to share a story, I guess, about our CSAP. So we live in a fairly large county, large for Kansas county, and we have a main city called Topeka, and then we have some other little smaller towns around. Well, Topeka had already done their CSAP. And Shawnee County had already had a CSAP done. And when they hired me to come work here, they asked me like, why is 911? Why is the sheriff's department? Why are we not involved in either of those plans? And I don't think it was intentional that we got left out, but they did it because they did not understand what the full ability of this grant is. And so if you start talking to people and they tell you, hey, 911, any emergency management, any systems don't qualify for these kinds of grants, or for SS4A in particular, make sure that you pull this out or show them and say, yes, we do. We are a huge part of roadway safety. We are a huge part of traffic. And if you have to, if no one in your community has done a CSAP, then go ahead and write this grant and ask for one to be done. But if you know that your county has already written one and didn't include you, or there's other, towns around you that have already written one, you are able in this grant to ask for supplemental planning money, and that will allow you to be able to be to use those CSAPs that are already done and already out there to get the 911 centers, to get emergency management, to get any of those added to it and looked at, and the data studied, so that it is really a comprehensive plan. I will say all the time, if it doesn't include your 911 systems, your sheriff's department, your police department, then it really isn't a comprehensive plan. It is a roadway plan, but until you start looking at some of the ways that you can actually fit in what we all do, then it really, I would not call it a comprehensive plan. So just make sure that they showed a website earlier that you could go to and look around you and see whose plans, who already has plans. Ask to see copies, call them. And, if it is your jurisdiction, put in this grant so that you can get the money, so that, the changes that need to be made for yourself become a part of this comprehensive plan that's adopted by your age or by your area. So some of the things that we are going to ask for the supplemental piece of ours is, we want to know maps. We want maps back of crash call data. We want to see how we can integrate our 911 data with the traffic and transportation part of the SS4A. We are wanting to see how our drones and our Drones as First Responder program can help with situational awareness and road safety. And then also, we asked for some money for technology updates. I'm going to pass it over to 911 Director Rab so he can tell you a bit about our 911 system and what we are actually going to be able to do with this grant money.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My name is Jeremy Rabb. I'm the Director of Shawnee County Emergency Communications. We are a division of the Sheriff's Office here in Shawnee County, and we do fall under our 911 center, does fall underneath the control of the sheriff. Our PSAP covers roughly 684 square miles of area. And so does the second part to the PSAP, which happens to be the emergency radio network that is also coupled with the communications division. We roughly take we'll just round out to about 400 911 calls a day for service, of course, several hundred administrative calls. I imagine that many of you out there, PSAPs, feel the pain of handling all of those calls and trying to find a way to streamline that information and make that call handling even more efficient. So our story really is like so many others throughout the country. Uh, Budget shortfalls, staffing shortfalls, technology that's out there that we'd love to implement, but maybe we don't have the money to implement it, but it would make things so much more streamlined. We've discovered that here in the last few years, the sheriff's budget has been flatlined, as probably many of you have experienced from your local areas and municipalities. So how do we get from where we are to where we need to be? How do we ensure that we're in a rural environment, especially integrating this information that we're collecting and getting it out in a timely manner to our first responders in the field? So that being, now we also, aside from just law enforcement, fire and EMS, we do partner very heavily here with DOTs, federal DOTs, state and local DOTs, along with many other agencies that also tie in, emergency management agencies at all levels. What we have in common here is that while everybody is talking, and to some degree, the sharing of information is what lacks, especially that timely sharing of information. So we were instructed to, let's pursue some grant funding. I do not know much about grant funding. It's very limited. And we were fortunate that we were able to secure April in time with a limited time frame to really start to look at the SS4A. There were other programs that we were looking at for our communications as well, and how we could potentially enhance those or make them more robust. But we started looking at this SS4A grant, and the wheels started turning when we realized, there's traffic safety and road safety. It has so many facets that tie into 911. And I would venture to say that many of the PSAP directors out there, or dispatchers, supervisors who happen to be watching, field many calls and try to relay information about potential accidents, what it's doing to traffic, how it's potentially diverting that large amount of traffic to other areas, and are there follow-ons. We even have large concerns here that when we have cars that are broken down on the side of the road, the amount of time it takes to get an officer there, keep their safety while they're on the side of the road, and to keep that traffic flowing in a safe manner. Rural, you can imagine there's trains that cross over railroad tracks. We do have train incidents that we have to deal with out here as well, and semi-tractor trailers that are carrying various types of hazmat materials or livestock feed, you name it, we end up having to deal with it. We have a I-70 corridor that cuts right through our county as well. Majority of our county is serviced by rural area volunteer fire departments. So their funding also was very limited, and we want to be able to provide them with more timely information. So if we have an incident that happens in the county somewhere, it could take a while to get eyes on to assess that situation. What's going on? A lot of times these callers can maybe just be passing by and make a call and can't relay that important information of what has occurred or where exactly is it at. So we started really looking at how with manpower shortages, even on the law enforcement side, the drone as first responder started to come into play. And we started discussing that as a way to potentially be able to gather that initial information, allow either the folks in our real-time crime center, which Lieutenant Coffin will address, and even our dispatchers or those there to start to assess that and get that information to the first responders before they even head out the door, hopefully, so that they can leave with all of the right equipment and show up on scene without a surprise of that car is rolled over, but maybe there was no mention about it because they said it just went on its side, or there's an extraction that needs to happen and the right tools weren't grabbed. There's numerous possibilities here for that. Along with other areas in the CAD and sharing that information. We're fortunate here in Kansas that we have a very robust CAD system that we operate on that that we can push certain information via CAD. The majority of Kansas operates on another robust next generation 911 system. So all of our neighboring counties are tied on the same 911 system. Now we can't share CAD information yet, but we do have the ability to handle a lot of data on the phones and transfers via the EZNet from one PSAP or 911 center to another. All of these technologies that facilitate large amounts of incoming information, data, crash data, even from OnStar, is wonderful to have, but we need to have a method or means to get that information out of the 911 center, again, to those first responders that are responding. So here's where we start to look at the areas that we want to address. And that would be, again, the drone as first responder, potentially as a way to gather that information and get it out there. I won't go too deep into that. I'm sure many of you perhaps know what a drone as first responder is, but the basics of it is we can launch drones autonomously with the correct applications, with the correct licenses to go to a site and put eyes on. Our dispatch and others could see that information, gather that assessment, and pass it on. The next area, of course, is our CAD system. And as I mentioned, we here have not yet have a method to pass our CAD information from our vendor to our neighboring county who is on a CAD from a different vendor. It exists, but it costs money. Nothing's cheap about a CAD. So we will start to explore methods to do that as well. And finally, the other part of this is the radio system. And there's a lot of new guidance out there from the federal side of how radios will handle information, PII, how that information is transmitted, and being able to make sure that critical information is shared again across the platform with other first responders. There's a lot of technology out there that we can take advantage of right now, more than I can stay on top of. I've gone to several conferences and I'm always amazed with the things that are out there that we can apply, would be wonderful to apply and would definitely be beneficial for the situation as a whole, the efficiency of a 911 center, the efficiency of first responders responding to those scenes, especially rural scenes that are out in the I don't want to say sticks, but they're definitely outside of a normal area that we envision first responders going to a lot of times. And then the communications of getting that out there. So that is our goals. That's what we went into. And as we started looking at this, we realized, how does all of this fit into the idea of an SS4A? Well, when you really start digging around and thinking about it, you're surprised at all the connections that are there, just with the partners that we partner with every day, especially on the DOT side, and other things. This day and age and this information age, we tie together with so many folks to make that response to a crash, injury, accident, or other, you name it, that much quicker, with the hope of, there's a ripple effect of not only are we getting there faster, but we're being more efficient. And the follow-on effect of all of that is also more efficient, whether we're rerouting traffic, needing to do a number of things. So we will continue on that. And we feel very confident that we're going to be successful in creating some proof of concepts that we can share with everybody. So with that, I'm going to pass this on over to Lieutenant Coffin.
Sorry for the movement. Hope everybody's not getting motion sick. I'm Lieutenant Coffin. I'm going to burn through this pretty quick so we're not holding everybody up. Let me try to find the slide that belongs to me. And my part of this is pretty much identifying that the best way to apply the funding to improve traffic safety outcomes in Shawnee County through the use of technology. In order to do that, we want to focus on some traffic flow, crash response, and resource management, especially as it relates to our real-time information center or real-time crime center. That's the area where we use as a central hub to aggregate information from multiple sources to try to get that out into the field as quickly as possible so that we have the most accurate information, especially as it relates to traffic. It's kind of a three-pronged approach between utilizing some mobile traffic video trailers, expanding our intersection cameras, and then obviously the primary focus is drones as a first responder. As we get into drones as first responder, it's kind of the cornerstone of the effort. It's designed to provide rapid aerial response to traffic-related incidents. We'll do this by partnering mostly with fire departments because they're strategically located already through some drone docking stations or fixed wing capabilities. Also integrating those drones with our CAD for rapid deployment or immediate deployment to get eyes on scene in seconds rather than minutes or even upwards of 15 or 20 minutes. The biggest challenge is the initial lack of information when calls come in. If we can get eyes on site in under 90 seconds, then we can confirm or refute that information so that our responding officers and 911 EMS has the most accurate information possible. It allows us to make more accurate response decisions and faster prioritization of serious incidents. Drones provide a top-down perspective that enhances scene understanding, which can identify congestion and hazards, detect secondary crash risks, and monitor lane blockages. It helps to establish safe ingress and egress, as well as guiding responders into and out of scene safety. My apologies for the PowerPoint. I'm not quite sure what's going on. And then assisting with the real-time traffic control decisions through our real-time information center. I think I'm almost at time here. I'll cover a couple of things about our intersection camera expansion. As we move out, we tend to build out a passive continuous monitoring system that bolsters current efforts that we already have put in place, which allow us to detect traffic incidents as they occur visually through the passive system instead of waiting for a delayed response from third-party call-ins. It provides immediate visual confirmation to dispatch and responders, as well as reducing reliance on delayed and incomplete caller information, allowing us to get more accurate response and better coordination of responding units. So essentially the goal is to make all of these components work together. The mobile trailers, if we move down that line as a pilot program, will help with event-based systems, which will also help to control some pedestrian risks as well and mitigate traffic-related collisions. The intersection cameras will allow continuous passive monitoring, and DFR will allow rapid on-demand aerial response. Together, they create a comprehensive traffic plan and safety network that allow to detect incidents faster, respond more effectively, and manage scenes more safely. And then as far as the rest of it is regarding the funding source. As previously stated, we were awarded $5 million in total. It is to be spent categorically. $1.35 million will be addressed to the dispatch and radio modernization. There will be $1 million dedicated to the real-time information center or real-time crime center. Roughly 1.175 to drones as a first responder. The comprehensive safety action plan that we have requested and will put out for RFP will be roughly $150,000. The project administrator will be funded by $475,000 over the course of the grant term. $550,000 is for technology integration, with roughly $300,000 remaining for indirect costs. I hope I wasn't too fast in moving through all of this. It looks like we're right on time for the closing of the hour. That is all I have at this point in time.
Thank you all for speaking with us today. Barnes County 911, Shawnee County Sheriff's Office, as well as our DOT SS4A program lead. We appreciate your time today. We are very excited about the opportunities of the SS4A program, which is providing again this year for our 911 partners to apply for grant funding directly through an application hosted by other locations like your local transportation, health, education, safety partners. While our DOT knows 911 is critical to highway safety, transportation partners in your communities may not think to invite 911 into road safety discussions. So we encourage you to introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself to local transportation partners. Stick your foot in the door. Ask them about what they do with a mind to help them understand 911 that they need to know better. Even if your own town partners aren't immediately receptive, also consider your county partners. 911 has had success getting awarded funds in prior years of SS4A, and we know that success can continue this year with your applications. Review the website, see if your local partners in your area already have an SS4A award and action plan. You may be able to provide them the critical input for that plan to make sure that it includes 911 strategies. And remember, this is all about action plans. So that is key to understanding the application process. Take a look at the SS4A website. There's a lot of good information there. We'd love the U.S. Department of Transportation to help advance and fund effective 911 strategies to improve motor vehicle crash outcomes. We understand how emergency medical dispatch protocols, pre-hospital blood transfusion, and CAD-to-CAD improves response not only to crash victims, but any trauma victim. And we know, most importantly, the urgency of your needs, and we want to support your telecommunicators. Look for that notice of funding opportunity. Might even post tomorrow or early next week. We thank you, our 911 partners. Your work is critical for the safety of our public, drivers, pedestrians, bicyclists, and other roadway users, and more. Thank you so much for your attention. If you have any questions on today's webinar, please reach out to us via email at ss4a_NHTSA, NHTSA@dot.gov. This concludes today's State of 911 webinar. Thanks for joining us, and we appreciate all you're doing for 911.